There are answers you keep for other people. The world is a mess. I'm focused on my career. I'm not maternal. And then there's the answer you keep for yourself, the one stored in a locked well with a lid you never lift because even the idea of the smell makes your eyes water. Jessica ran the bookstore 2 streets over from the river, a place with a bell on the door and a register that miscounted on weeks ending in 3. She set aside hardcovers for the students and held paperbacks for the regulars. Days there had the soft thrum of pages turning. But the week after the box, something began leaving small, unasked for gifts along her path like breadcrumbs laced with pins. A chalk sunflower appeared on their kitchen windowsill, a child's rough drawing in yellow and white, the kind that grinds dust into your skin. Either of them had chalk. In the box of Christmas ornaments, tucked inside tissue paper between a glass snowman and a tin star, she found a thin elastic bundle of 6 newborn hospital bracelets. The kind that say mother and infant, and hold you to a moment by the wrist. The type was smudged out, the way names and dreams are. One Saturday night, a perfect circle of uncooked rice ringed the hall floor. Jonathan swept it up, laughing. We got polite ghosts. They're doing rituals in the wrong religion. It wasn't a haunting, not in any movie way. The lights didn't flicker, the drains didn't talk. What Jessica felt was worse and better. The house had grown a memory and didn't know what to do with it. Jonathan built a careful room down the short hall, not calling it a nursery, not calling it anything. He patched plaster, painted a pale gray she picked in silence, took the closet doors off their stubborn track and set them back so they behaved. He changed the light fixture. He made a shelf and didn't put anything on it. Just making it nicer, he said. His voice wore work gloves. His eyes wore hope. She loved him for both and forgave either. She found the letter on a Monday. She had gone to the utility closet for a fresh light bulb because the kitchen fixture clicked twice before it obeyed, and that sort of thing digs under her skin. The envelope had slid behind a crate of paint rollers. City letterhead. Jonathan's name typed neat. Her maiden name in the second paragraph, her current one in parentheses like a promise kept by paperwork. Dear Mr. Carter. In response to your inquiry, we confirm that Jessica Miller, now Jessica Carter, was admitted to City Perinatal Center on June 14th of year. Records indicate a live birth at 2:17. We have no record of infant discharge to parental care. For further inquiry, contact the Department of Child Services. The same time as the lullaby. Jessica stood in the narrow light of the closet while the floor shifted under what she'd built, the way old houses settle, loud in their bones. Jonathan was in the hallway replacing the switch that had the personality of a raccoon. It worked but stared at you while it did. You knew. She sounded like someone speaking through a doorway to a stranger who had their keys. He held the screwdriver in his palm without squeezing it, like he remembered sudden movements spook horses. I suspected. I wrote one letter. I didn't know how to. I didn't want to ambush you with a maybe. It wasn't a maybe, she said, and found out what breath tastes like when it's hauled up from deep water. I had a baby. He didn't move closer. He didn't move away. Then we find them. And if... She couldn't finish the sentence. If they hate me. If they're gone. If nothing wants to be found. We try anyway. He turned the new switch. The light came on and stayed. That night, Jessica took the blue box out of the closet and set it on the kitchen table. She wound the mechanism once and watched the brass tongue lag. The lullaby came out thin and brave. She set a notepad beside it and wrote 2 words that made her hand shake. Help me. The Department of Child Services sat in a building whose color someone had once called stone and then never looked at again. Inside, linoleum that remembered everyone who'd ever walked on it, a bulletin board with too many flyers and not enough pins, a woman at a desk with the nameplate Martha Reynolds and a cup that said number 1 Grandma in black Sharpie. Martha listened, typed, didn't look particularly at either of them until she did, her gaze finding Jessica the way measuring tapes find the seam. If the relinquishment was properly filed, she said, we can't release identifying information without a court order. But we can forward a letter from you to the current guardians. They can decide whether to respond. She looked at the monitor, then at Jessica again, and something gentler entered the room. There, 12. 12. Jessica repeated, as if the number might crack in her mouth. At 12, sometimes kids want answers, Martha said, which is the sort of hope that comes in a plain envelope and still feels like a gift. Jessica wrote the letter that night at the kitchen table. She started it too fancy, then too sorry, then too short. She tore 5 drafts and had to empty the trash because they looked like injuries. The one she mailed said, "Hello? My name is Jessica. I don't know how to put everything in a single letter. I was 19 and alone when you were born. I made a choice I told myself was the right one for you, and I buried it so deep I couldn't hear myself breathe. I don't want to take anything from you. I don't want to break the life you have. I only want to meet you, to say I care, to answer your questions if you have them, and to accept it if you don't. Whatever you decide, I will respect. Jessica." Jonathan read it, kissed the paper where her name was, and sealed the envelope like it was a wound he could suture shut. The answer came faster than anyone deserved. Martha called 3 days later. "The guardian agreed to a supervised meeting this Saturday. The child wants to come." The child had a name. "What is it?" Jessica asked, and hated how hungry her voice sounded. "Grace," Martha said. Saturday arrived with the kind of blue sky that makes you suspicious. Jessica wore the wrong sweater and kept her hands in her sleeves. Jonathan carried a small brown paper bag with a little box of pencils inside, because nothing says we come in peace like graphite. The door opened. A woman in her 40s entered, hair back, face careful. She held the hand of a girl in a navy coat whose eyes were gray in the way old photographs are gray, every color hiding there if you knew the trick to call it out. "Hi," the woman said. "I'm Linda." She looked at the girl with the kind of love that makes room and draws borders in the same breath. "This is Grace." Grace sat and set a sketchbook on the table. She drew without looking up, pencil making that sound pencils make when the hand knows where it's going. "I read your letter," she said, not unkind, not kind exactly. Careful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Jessica said, and the words tasted like a dare to herself to keep breathing. "Why did you give me away?" "There are bombs that explode slowly." Jessica felt every second. "I was 19, she said. "And alone. I thought you'd be better off without me. I told myself that so hard it sounded like truth." She swallowed and hated how tears change your voice into somebody you don't respect. "I regret it every day. That doesn't make it different. But it's the only honest thing I have." Grace kept drawing a moment longer, then turned the book. "A bird. A swallow, wings like parentheses, body a sentence. We have swallows under our roof," she said. "They come back every summer. Even if the nest falls, they build it again." Jonathan made a noise that wasn't a word and bit the inside of his cheek to keep it that way. Linda's shoulder dropped the half-inch of someone who'd been braced for worse. That day was 15 minutes and it felt like the part of a movie where the music is low and your hands are in fists without you noticing. The next meeting was 20. Then 40. Then an hour. Then not at the agency anymore, but a coffee shop with wobbly tables, then Linda's kitchen where there were mugs that didn't match and an old radio that only knew the blues, then, at last, the place the lullaby started, the Carter's kitchen. Grace touched everything with her eyes first, the way kids do when they've had to learn new rooms like languages. "I have something weird," Jessica said, and even heard herself laugh. "You can say no." She brought out the blue polka-dot box. The ribbon unfurled. The pacifier winked like something found on a beach that you know you should put back. The wind-up tongue was still. Grace reached and turned the key twice. The lullaby started, thin but decided. "He was upside down," Grace said. "He needed light." Jessica cried in a way she hadn't allowed, face bare, mouth open, no hands. Jonathan stood behind her and let his hands be her spine. They didn't say Mom or Dad. They didn't rename the furniture. Linda didn't step back, she stepped close and stayed there. What grew between the four of them was not a triangle, it was a square with a swinging gate. Grace came on Tuesdays to the bookstore if Linda's shift ran late at the clinic. She did homework at the counter and drew faces without eyes, because she liked movement better than identity. Eyes make people be themselves too much, she said. Sometimes I need them to be the movement they're doing, not their names. Fair, Jessica said, and thought about all the names she'd worn, the way you wear coats for weather and occasionally choose wrong. On Saturdays, Grace sat cross-legged in Jonathan's shop and learned wood. She liked sandpaper and the way the grain tells you which direction is yes. He showed her the trick of breath: blow away the dust, see the mistake, fix it before it makes a story you can't change. She called him Jonathan, and it felt like a good thing dressed in its true name. One afternoon, Linda called. There was a fight at school, she said, voice steady but thin. She's okay. It was words at first. Grace shoved a crumpled office referral across Linda's table when Jessica arrived. She said, I don't have a real mom. I said, I have too. She laughed. I hit her. I've been called worse things than not real, Jessica said. Grace's mouth made its new favorite shape, the beginning of a smile she didn't want to owe anyone. Did you hit them? No, Jessica said. But I have a very good imagination. Grace snorted. Same. They didn't turn it into a lesson. They sat with it until it cooled. Later, when they had waffles, Linda said the only sentence that mattered. We love you. Next time, maybe we don't use fists. Grace put her head on Linda's shoulder and didn't pull it away when Jessica set her palm on Grace's back, not pushing, not claiming, just there. Memory is a trick drawer. You pull on the knob and it slides smooth. The next time, it sticks, then opens so fast everything inside breaks. Jessica started therapy with a woman named Dr. Alvarez, whose office had plants that were alive for reasons beyond politeness. On the second visit, Jessica stopped saying I don't remember and began saying the more dangerous thing. I do, but it comes like a slideshow someone else narrates. There was a boy, not a man, older than her but still an unfinished thing, who dealt with pain by handing it to the nearest body. There was a night that smelled like beer and a bathroom with a lock that didn't understand its job. There was the way people can do something to your life and then walk off into theirs. There was a hospital ceiling with tired tiles. There was a hand with a pen and a form and a bad idea that told itself a story about being noble. Alvarez said, You did something to survive, and then you survived the something. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. A light over a sign that said, Here's what this is. Jessica told Jonathan none of the details and all of it. He didn't ask for more. He learned to drink his coffee beside her in the mornings while she stared out the kitchen window at the square of grass that was theirs and wasn't sufficient, and was still enough. The box's note, do you remember? Stopped sounding like a finger jabbed into her chest. It became a string she could hold when the inside of her turned to water. Grace asked to sleep over on a Friday and brought the box with her. You left it at my house, she said. Or it left you. I don't know the rules of these things. They burned the first batch of grilled cheese and laughed until the smoke alarm scolded them. They watched a dumb movie and made it good by talking over it. Jessica stood in the doorway later and listened to Grace whisper to the swallow carved by Jonathan on the nightstand like it could carry messages to morning. Hey, Grace said to the air between them at breakfast. You know you can't take me from Linda. We know, Jonathan said before the sentence could grow spines. I want to have two places that feel like mine, Grace said. If that's a thing people get to have. It is, Jessica said, and meant not for everyone, not always, but for you, yes, because we will work until it is. They called it what it was, visiting rights of the heart. No forms covered it. They did it anyway. A life is built of small decisions obeyed daily. Grace had Wednesdays at the Carters some weeks, to do algebra with Jessica and sawdust with Jonathan. Sundays belonged to Linda because church wasn't her religion but ritual was. She cooked, she cleaned, She made phone calls to her sister while she folded towels and said in a voice that told whole chapters. Summer brought swallows under Linda's eaves and, under the Carters, starlings who tried to move in and were moved along gently because they are an invasive species, and boundaries are also love. One June evening, Jonathan carried in a small thing wrapped in a shop rag. He unrolled it with the flourish of a magician and revealed a swallow hand-carved from walnut, its wings set not to fly but to remind. "For your desk," he said. Grace ran her finger along the spine where the wood held its breath. "Thank you. It's a little rough on the underside," he apologized, because he can't help looking for the place that could be better. "It's allowed," she said. "So am I." That night, after everyone went to bed, Jessica stood in the kitchen with the lights off and the window open to let the summer in. The box sat on the shelf. She didn't wind it. She hummed the lullaby under her breath, and the quiet hummed back. "Do you remember?" The note asked from inside her, the way ink sometimes leaps from paper to bone. "Yes," she answered, out loud for the first time. The word didn't break anything. It made a hinge. Nothing moves without snags. On a hot Sunday in July, Jessica bought sketch paper and a set of soft pencils Grace wanted, then added paint she hadn't mentioned because love sometimes gets it wrong with the best intentions. Grace opened the bag, saw the paints, and her face did what 12-year-olds' faces do when something feels like pressure, wearing a helpful smile. "I don't paint," she said. "Not yet. I thought you might want to try," Jessica said too fast. Linda watched from the sink, eyes like someone measuring weather. Grace put the paints back in the bag with two careful hands. "I don't want to owe you," she said, and fled to the porch where the swallows stitched the sky with thread made of themselves. Jessica stood with the wrong bag in her hands and felt the old fear. "I'm going to wreck this." Linda dried her hands on a dish towel and put her palm on Jessica's shoulder in a way that established no debt. "She's learning the math of love," Linda said. "She will count a long time before she trusts the answer. That's not about you. That's about the world." "I keep doing too much," Jessica said. "You're doing," Linda said. "That's the verb we have." They left the paints in the closet. Half a year later, Grace asked for them like it was her idea, because it was. The first thing she painted was a window with rain outside it, and a swallow's shadow crossing the glass. She didn't hate it. She didn't show anyone. She tucked it under her bed the way you hide treasure from pirates you haven't met yet. When the storm came, it came the way storms do in this part of the state, a bruise from horizon to horizon, a wind full of grit. The radio said stay inside. The neighbors tied down their grill and left the trampoline flat. At Linda's, the power died and the house went candle gold. Grace's breathing got fast. Storms hooked her nerves and dragged. Linda texted Jessica, "We're fine," and then nothing, and then phone dying. At the Carters, Jessica paced. The lullaby rattled in the box like a trapped fly. Jonathan set out candles and a flashlight and the good batteries he refuses to use because there might be a better emergency later. The door banged. Grace stood there wet to the bone, hair a tangle, eyes blown wide. "Linda sent me," she said. Her phone died. "The streets flooded the other way," she said. "Come here." Jonathan pulled her in. Jessica wrapped her in a towel that smelled like their detergent and the idea of safety. Grace shook like a colt. A tree somewhere cracked like a rifle. The three of them sat on the kitchen floor because sometimes floors are the only place that doesn't argue with your height. "When it gets loud," Grace said, "I hear the song and I think, it's coming for me." "What is?" Jessica asked. "The part where I don't get to have this," Grace said, and lifted her chin at the room. "Any of it. You. Linda. Nobody gets to keep two of a thing they love. Not without a catch." In the Candle's small theater, Jessica saw something she had lived with so long she called it furniture. "We don't get two of the same thing," she said. "We get one thing in two places. It's not a trick. It just looks like one from far away." Grace's hands were fists that wanted other careers. Jessica reached for the blue box, set it between them. Do you want to wind it? She asked. Grace turned the key and set it down open. The song came out brave. The storm tried to swallow it and failed. Listen, Jessica said. It keeps playing. Even when it's not loud. It's stubborn, like us. Grace breathed with the song until the storm slowed and the world remembered how to be heavy without being mean. She fell asleep on Jessica's shoulder and drooled a little, because being 12 is a job that leaves you with less dignity than you planned for. Jonathan sat with his back to the cabinets and watched them both like a man who'd found a map that didn't lie. When the power came back on at 3:11 a.m., the microwave blinked zeros and the lullaby spun to a stop. No one wounded again. They didn't need to. Paperwork came up like rocks in a field. If they wanted anything official, medical permission slips, school forms, someone with a desk had to invent a line. Linda met with a lawyer at a community clinic who had kind hands and the exhausted smile of someone who has seen systems from the inside and still believes in trying anyway. They didn't file for change. They filed for clarity. The form said words like standing and authorization and did not once say family. They learned to make their own sentences. Grace's therapist knew, because 12 is hard on the inside, wanted a safety plan, who to call if the inside weather got weird. The plan had 3 names. Grace folded it small and kept it in her pocket like a spell. At school, a teacher sent home an assignment to draw your family tree. Grace drew a grove. When the teacher circled it in red and wrote choose one home, Linda went to the school with her mouth polite and her eyes not. The teacher kept the red pen closed for the rest of the year. There were firsts. The first time Grace asked Jonathan to come to the school woodworking demonstration because the other dads had brought their measuring tapes and she wanted someone who could tighten a clamp without making it a performance. He stood in the back with sawdust on his jeans and cried later in their car where it would do the least harm. The first time Grace called Linda Mom, in front of Jessica and didn't look at her to see if it landed like a stone, it didn't. It landed like a bird on a line. Jessica called her own mother for the first time in months and didn't say anything about any of it. They talked about the price of tomatoes and a neighbor who painted his mailbox a color the HOA would hate. The first time Jessica woke at 2:17 for no good reason, waited, and the lullaby didn't start. The silence didn't taste like fear. It tasted like water without ice. Winter came sharp. They'd put the blue box on a shelf by the clock. Not away. Not center stage. Just there. Grace wound it once every visit like checking a heartbeat. The pacifier stayed where it had always stayed, a question with the edge sanded down. The note with its 4 words lived under the music movement like a secret that had changed its job. On New Year's Day, they ate pancakes at Jessica and Jonathan's, then drove to the park by the river where the trees were bare and honest. They didn't make resolutions. They made a list of things they liked that didn't require permission: toast, pencils, warm socks, the exact sound a swallow makes when it turns under a roof. Grace added not getting grated on your feelings. They built a birdhouse none of the birds would use, because birds are rude. They put it up anyway. Spring brought a letter with a return address the city uses when it wants to sound like it lives in a nicer neighborhood. The court had stamped a packet that said the thing they'd been living like was now a thing written down. Jonathan read it, and made a noise like he'd been holding his breath all winter and could finally afford to be stupid with oxygen. Linda hugged them both and said, "We did it without them, but I'm glad they noticed." Grace took the packet, read the first page, and put it on the counter face down. "I don't need the government to tell me who you are," she said. "But okay." Jessica laughed and made grilled cheese without burning it. When the smoke alarm didn't go off, Grace looked personally offended. "You think life will settle into its new shape and then it wriggles when you're not looking." A baby came to the clinic where Linda worked, all eyes and appetite, a temporary case like so many. Linda held him and her body remembered something it had known without being taught. She went home and cried 6 minutes in the shower where her tears were private. She didn't tell anyone to fix it. She told them because saying it out loud makes it real and therefore less haunted. Jessica stood in her kitchen later and thought I could do that, and I don't have to, and both things are true. she told Jonathan. He put his hands on her face and said, "We will want things at different speeds. We will not punish the wanting." They had tea and watched a dumb show and did not decide anything, which is sometimes the bravest kind of decision. On Grace's 13th birthday, the four of them ate cake on Linda's porch where the swallows were late because spring had been weird. Grace opened gifts, books, a decent backpack, a set of brushes she had asked for on purpose. Jessica gave her a frame Jonathan had made, simple, clean, and a printed photo of the four of them taken by a neighbor who knew how to catch light. Grace held the photo the way you hold a small animal. "I look," she started, then stopped. "You look like you," Jessica said. "I was going to say happy," Grace said, as if it might jinx it. "Same thing," Linda said, and cut another piece of cake because some things are fixed by sugar and some things aren't, and you try anyway. That night, the swallows came home all at once, stitching the dusk. Grace stood under them and tilted her head back and laughed a sound Jessica had never heard from her, one with no edge in it. It took time for the blue box to become just a box. Not because it lost power, because its power went elsewhere. It moved into the way Jessica put her hand on Jonathan's back when she passed him at the sink. It moved into the text threads where Linda sent photos of bad dinners and good sunsets. It moved into Grace's drawings, where faces appeared, cautious and then not, eyes sketched and last with a pencil held soft. One late summer afternoon, Grace left a new drawing on the Carters' kitchen table before she and Linda went home. It was a house with 2 windows and a swallow above the eaves. Underneath, in careful block letters that didn't quite agree on their height, "There's room for everyone here." Jessica propped it on the counter where the grocery list usually lived and cried the complicated way that includes a laugh. Jonathan stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a bird that looked nothing like a swallow, and nobody cared. The lullaby still played some nights at 2:17, but only when someone wounded. On nights when Jessica woke out of old habit, she lay in the dark and listened to the faraway hum of a city being itself. She thought of the well inside her with the locked lid. It was still there. But now there was a rope and a bucket and a sun somewhere above it, and sometimes she lifted the lid and didn't faint from the smell. When the song's question rose up, "Do you remember?" Jessica answered it every way it could be answered. "Yes. Enough to be kind to the girl I was, even when she did harm trying to survive. Yes. Enough to name the fear so it can't drive. Yes. Enough to say no to what hurts and yes to what is hard but good." The house, generous with its quiet, learn news sounds, a third toothbrush in a cup, laughter over burned bread, the scritch of pencil on paper late, the vacuum Jonathan ran because he was not a monster. The blue box's music became one note in a score that no longer needed it to tell you what kind of story this was. On an ordinary Tuesday in September, when the light came through the kitchen window in one gold bar, Grace arrived after school, threw her backpack down in the hallway, and said, too casual, "I told the office to put your names on my contact list." The lady wrote them, but she spelled Jessica with a Z. "Monster," Jonathan said. Grace smirked. I corrected her. She looked at me weird. I looked at her back. She opened the cupboard without asking because she knew where the glasses lived, and some magic is in knowing which doors you're allowed to open. "Big step," Jessica said. She kept her tone on the table between them where Grace could take it if she wanted. Grace shrugged. "It's just a list." Then, about 30 seconds later, quietly, "It's also not." They ate pasta that boiled over twice because they were talking. After dinner, Grace drew 3 people with eyes and gave 2 of them laugh lines and one of them a frown that meant thinking, not anger. She didn't name them. She didn't have to. The end isn't a scene. It's a set of days that refuse to turn into an ending because they've decided to keep going. But if you wanted one, you could pick this. Late autumn. The last of the swallows long gone, a wind with bite. Linda's porch has a new coat of paint that looks like a decision. The 4 of them sit with mugs that steam. Grace wears a hat she pretends to hate. Jonathan fiddles with the hinge on the screen door because hinges are destiny to him. Jessica holds the blue box on her lap with the lid open and doesn't wind it. Why didn't you want kids? Grace asks, not accusing, not fishing, just curious the way you are about a town you live in but never walked every street of. Jessica thinks. The old answer rises, because I was afraid, and she lets it pass through her without setting up camp. I thought a child would judge me, she says. That they'd be the reckoning, not the road. I didn't understand that love is a way forward, not a jury. Grace nods like she's storing that on a shelf that will hold later. Okay, she says. Can we make grilled cheese? We can, Jessica says. And we can burn the first one out of respect for tradition. Inside, the kitchen throws light into the early dark. The pan heats. The bread takes butter. The first sandwich sacrifices itself to the smoke alarm gods, and everyone laughs and no one pretends they didn't do it on purpose. On the shelf, the blue box sits with its question printed in the bones of the wood now. Do you remember? The house remembers, too, not as a haunted thing, but as a generous archive of small, brave days. A workshop dusted in gold where a swallow of walnut takes its shape, a bookstore bell that announces the faithful, a porch where a girl turned into herself under the care of 3 people who learned new grammar because love required it. And if, deep at night, at 2:17, you pass their window and hear a lullaby, know this, it isn't a ghost reaching back. It's the opposite. It's the sound of the future, teaching the past a better melody.